You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
That was General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in World War II, the future president delivering by radio to soldiers, sailors, and airmen the order of the day for June 6, 1944, Operation Overlord. It was D-Day. Now the 80th anniversary of D-Day is coming up. Through the words of American presidents who have spoken over the years at Normandy, in this podcast we hear about American soldiers who fought there and died there. Some of the greatest and most legendary speeches of the modern American presidency have been delivered at Normandy for D-Day anniversaries. American presidents have spoken at Normandy 8 times since D-Day, and you'll hear them in this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly. On January 5, 1978, President Jimmy Carter visited Normandy. It wasn't a milestone anniversary. He was at the end of a 7-nation tour of Europe. But Carter was the first American president to visit the site of the D-Day landings. He spoke at the Normandy American Cemetery. If you're unfamiliar with the history of D-Day, President Carter described what happened.
On the 6th of June, 1944, the Allied forces came to the beaches known to us as Omaha, Utah, Juneau, Gold, and Sword to begin a heroic action leading to the liberation of Europe. On that day, an unprecedented armada landed on the shores of Normandy. 176,000 brave troops came here from England to launch a tremendous attack. Within 2 weeks, more than 1.5 million troops had moved into France and the other coastal countries. Before me, beyond the flags of my country and that of France, there are more than 9,000 white marble crosses erected in memory of those who died near here. They served under great commanders: General Eisenhower, General Montgomery, General Bradley, General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who because of his heroism was awarded the Medal of Honor, and later joined the French 2nd Armored Division under General Leclerc.
President Carter laid wreaths at a memorial near the scene of the bloodiest fighting, Omaha Beach.
The 1st and the 29th American Divisions were the ones who landed near here on the Omaha beach. This was where the most fierce resistance was encountered. And of the roughly 2,500 who came ashore, about 2,000 died. At one point, American Rangers had to scale a vertical 100-foot cliff while the Germans above rolled down grenades upon them. On Omaha Beach, hundreds of our troops lay dead. And the sight was so impressive that because of that, the German commanders thought, until it was too late for them, that the victory had been won by Germany.
President Carter cited the imposing vertical cliffs. So too, 6 years later, President Reagan. The tradition of modern American presidents making a pilgrimage to Normandy to mark milestone anniversaries began with Ronald Reagan. June 6, 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day.
The Rangers looked up and saw the enemy soldiers at the edge of the cliffs shooting down at them with machine guns and throwing grenades. And the American Rangers began to climb. They shot rope ladders over the face of these cliffs and began to pull themselves up. When one Ranger fell, another would take his place. When one rope was cut, a Ranger would grab another and begin his climb again. They climbed, shot back, and held their footing. Soon, one by one, the Rangers pulled themselves over the top, and in seizing the firm land at the top of these cliffs, they began to seize back the continent of Europe. 225 came here. After 2 days of fighting, only 90 could still bear arms. Behind me is a memorial that symbolizes the Ranger daggers that were thrust into the top of these cliffs. And before me are the men who put them there. These are the boys of Pointe du Hoc. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. And these are the heroes who helped end a war.
President Bill Clinton spoke at Normandy for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 1994.
The freedom they fought for was no abstract concept. It was the stuff of their daily lives. Listen to what Frank Elliott had written to his wife from the embarkation point in England. I miss hamburgers a la Coney Island, American beer a la Duquesne, American shows a la Penn Theater, and American girls a la you. Pauline Elliott wrote back on June 6th as she and their one-year-old daughter listened on the radio. Little Deronda is the only one not affected by D-Day news. I hope and pray she will never remember any of this, but only the happiness of the hours that will follow her daddy's homecoming step on the porch. Well, millions of our GIs did return home from that war to build up our nations and enjoy life's sweet pleasures. But on this field, there are 9,386 who did not. 33 pairs of brothers, a father and his son, 11 men from tiny Bedford, Virginia, and Corporal Frank Elliott, killed near these bluffs by a German shell on D-Day. They were the fathers we never knew, the uncles we never met, the friends who never returned, the heroes we can never repay. They gave us our world. And those simple sounds of freedom we hear today are their voices speaking to us across the years.
By the way, you heard President Clinton mention the men who died from tiny Bedford, Virginia. Bedford is now the site of the National D-Day Memorial. Vice President Mike Pence spoke there on June 6, 2019, the D-Day Final Salute 75th Anniversary commemorative ceremony. Vice President Pence told the story of the Bedford Boys.
Today we also think of others from this very community who were among your ranks on that fateful day. 44 boys who had never strayed far from home, mustered out to England, and some to eternity. They were hometown folk who became national heroes, and they will forever be remembered to history as the Bedford Boys. Since the earliest days of our republic, Bedford, like every other community in this land, has given its finest to defend America in battle. But for Bedford, D-Day was different. While most of this town was still asleep in bed, First Lieutenant Ray Nance was racing across the sands, dodging mortar rounds and tracer fire. While the morning bells of the Presbyterian Church were ringing, Private First Class Dickie Overstreet was nursing his wounds along the very sea wall that he had been determined to reach. While 50 women worked late in the night at the county library, rolling 9,000 bandages for our sons and brothers overseas, Technical Sergeant Ray Stevens had already fallen after leading his men onto Omaha Beach. It was only a few days later that his twin brother Roy found Ray's dog tags on a cross in a makeshift graveyard not far from the beach they'd both landed on. That night, the people of Bedford and all of America heard President Roosevelt ask Almighty God to let our hearts be stout, to wait out the long travail, to bear sorrows that may come. And they did come. On D-Day, 20 Bedford boys with the 116th Infantry stormed Omaha Beach and fell in the defense of freedom.
The National D-Day Memorial was dedicated in Bedford, Virginia on June 6, 2001. President George W. Bush spoke.
57 years ago today, America and the nations of Europe formed a bond that has never been broken. And all of us incurred a debt that can never be repaid. Today, as America dedicates our D-Day Memorial, we pray that our country will always be worthy of the courage that delivered us from evil and saved the free world. God bless America, and God bless the World War II generation.
That was the 50th anniversary of D-Day. It was 3 months before the terror attacks of 9/11. President Bush went to Normandy the next year for Memorial Day. On May 27, 2002, he again mentioned the Bedford Boys.
Such was the size of the Battle of Normandy. 38 pairs of brothers died in the liberation, including Bedford and Raymond Hobacker, Virginia, both who fell on D-Day. Johnny saying, he can't be dead. I promised Mother I'd look after him. Such was the size of the Battle of Normandy. 38 pairs of brothers died in the liberation, including Bedford and Raymond Hobacker, Virginia, both who fell on D-Day. Raymond's body was never found. All he left behind was his Bible, discovered in the sand. Their mother asked that Bedford be buried here as well, in the place Raymond was lost, so her sons would always be together.
For the 60th anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 2004, President Bush again went to Normandy, and again he mentioned Bedford.
Before the landing in Omaha, Sergeant Earl Parker of Bedford, Virginia, proudly passed around a picture of Danny, the newborn daughter he had never held. He told the fellas, if I could see this daughter of mine, I wouldn't mind dying. Sergeant Parker's remembered here at the Garden of the Missing. And he is remembered back home by a woman in her 60s who proudly shows a picture of her handsome, smiling young dad. All who are buried and named in this place are held in the loving memory of America.
President Bush remembered other soldiers who died.
At all the beaches and landing grounds of D-Day, men saw some images they would spend a lifetime preferring to forget. One soldier carries a memory of 3 paratroopers dead and hanging from telephone poles like a horrible crucifixion scene. All who fought saw images of pain and death, raw and relentless. The men of D-Day also witnessed scenes they would proudly and faithfully recount. Scenes of daring and self-giving that went beyond anything the Army or the country could ask. They remember men like technician 5th grade John Pender Jr., whose job was to deliver vital radio equipment to the beach. He was gravely wounded before he hit shore, and he kept going. He delivered the radio, and instead of taking cover, went back into the surf 3 more times to salvage equipment. Under constant enemy fire, this young man from Pennsylvania was shot twice again and died on the beach below us.
The week before President Bush spoke at Normandy, his father, former President George H.W. Bush, spoke at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. It was an interfaith ceremony coinciding with the dedication of the National World War II Memorial. Here's President Bush 41, who fought in World War II, on May 29, 2004, marking the 60th anniversary of D-Day.
Indeed, 60 years ago this very week, in what history will surely mark as one of the great achievements of mankind, 2 million sons from 15 countries jumped into flak-filled skies and a blood-soaked surf and met death on an even plain, and on a horrible day filled with destruction, helped save the world.
By the way, an historical footnote to President George W. Bush's 2004 D-Day speech at Normandy: the day before, on June 5, 2004, the first president who gave a speech at Normandy for a D-Day milestone anniversary, Ronald Reagan, died. President Bush began his speech with that news.
It is a high honor to represent the American people here at Normandy on the 6th of June, 2004. 20 summers ago, and another American president came here to Normandy to pay tribute to the men of D-Day. He was a courageous man himself and a gallant leader in the cause of freedom. And today we honor the memory of Ronald Reagan.
President Reagan died the day before the 60th anniversary of D-Day. 5 years later, the day before the 65th anniversary of D-Day, a veteran of World War II died. Jim Noreen was a paratrooper in the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne. He died in Normandy, where he had traveled for the 65th anniversary ceremony. Jim Noreen's death was noted in President Barack Obama's June 6, 2009 speech at the Normandy American Cemetery.
I know this trip doesn't get any easier as the years pass. But for those of you who make it, there's nothing that could keep you away. One such veteran, a man named Jim Noreen, was a member of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Division of the 101st Airborne. Last night, after visiting this cemetery for one last time, he passed away in his sleep. Jim was gravely ill when he left his home, and he knew that he might not return. But just as he did 65 years ago, he came anyway. May he now rest in peace with the boys he once bled with. And may his family always find solace in the heroism he showed here.
President Obama spoke in more detail about Jim Noreen 2 months later, addressing the veterans of foreign wars, August 17, 2009.
Then this spring, Jim made a decision. He would return to Europe once more. 85 years old, frail, gravely ill, he knew he might not make it back home. But like the paratrooper he always was, he was determined. So near Bastogne, he returned to the places he knew so well. At a Dutch town liberated by our GIs, school children lined the sidewalks and sang the Star-Spangled Banner. And in the quiet clearing of an American cemetery, he walked among those perfect lines of white crosses of fellow soldiers who had fallen long ago, their names forever etched in stone. And then, back where he had served 65 years before, Jim Noreen passed away. At night, in his sleep. Quietly, peacefully, the tranquil and steady dedication of a lifetime. The next day, I was privileged to join the commemoration at Normandy to mark the day when the beaches were stormed and a continent was free. There were presidents and prime ministers and veterans from the far corners of the earth. But long after the bands stopped playing and the crowd stopped cheering, it was the story of a departed VFW member that echoed in our hearts.
President Obama is the only American president to speak at Normandy for milestone anniversaries of D-Day 2 times, the 65th anniversary in 2009 and on June 6, 2014, the 70th anniversary.
Think of Harry Kolkowitz, the Jewish son of Russian immigrants who fudged his age at enlistment so he could join his friends in the fight. And don't worry, Harry, the statute of limitations has expired. Harry came ashore at Utah Beach on D-Day. And now that he's come back, we said he could have anything he wants for lunch today. He helped liberate this coast after all, but he said a hamburger would do fine. What's more American than that?
Harry Kolkowitz was in Normandy for that speech. And note that President Obama mentioned hamburgers. Turns out food was important for Harry Kolkowitz. He went into the restaurant business. In 1978, Harry Kolkowitz opened the Mad Batter restaurant in Cape May, New Jersey. He served Battle of the Bulge lunches. Harry Kolkowitz died in 2017 at the age of 92. You also heard President Obama note that Harry Kolkowitz was the Jewish son of Russian immigrants. In fact, one notable common thread in these presidential Normandy speeches is the prominent mentions of what happened to Europe's Jews during World War II, the Holocaust. President Obama broadly incorporated that theme in his 2009 Normandy speech.
For what we faced in Nazi totalitarianism was not just a battle of competing interests. It was a competing vision of humanity. Nazi ideology sought to subjugate and humiliate and exterminate. It perpetrated murder on a massive scale, fueled by a hatred of those who were deemed different and therefore inferior. It was evil.
President Donald Trump made a direct reference to the Holocaust in his Normandy speech on June 6, 2019, the 75th anniversary of D-Day.
Some who landed here pushed all the way to the center of Germany. Some threw open the gates of Nazi concentration camps to liberate Jews who had suffered the bottomless horrors of the Holocaust. And some warriors fell on other fields of battle, returning to rest on this soil for eternity.
And here's President Reagan in 1984.
We're here to mark that day in history when the Allied armies joined in battle to reclaim this continent to liberty. For 4 long years, much of Europe had been under a terrible shadow. Free nations had fallen. Jews cried out in the camps. Millions cried out for liberation. Europe was enslaved and the world prayed for its rescue. Here in Normandy, the rescue began.
And President Clinton in 1994.
At this place, let us honor all the Americans who lost their lives in World War II. Let us remember as well that over 40 million human beings from every side perished. Soldiers on the field of battle, Jews in the ghettos and death camps, civilians ravaged by shell fire and famine. May God give rest to all their souls.
President George H.W. Bush cited specific death camps during his 2004 remarks at the National Cathedral.
The passage of time makes it easy to forget that the 1930s and the 1940s were decades of great danger and uncertainty in our world, led by fanatics. The armies we faced routinely and systematically killed without remorse, seeking to destroy the institutions and freedoms that we've always held so dear. And such was their brutal, thoroughly evil nature that in hindsight their actions almost seem surreal, as if they occurred in another lifetime. And yet you need look no further than to the death camps in Auschwitz and Treblinka.
In 2004 at Normandy, his son, President George W. Bush, cited Anne Frank.
In Amsterdam, a 14-year-old girl heard the news of D-Day over the radio in her attic hiding place. She wrote in her diary, "It still seems too wonderful, too much like a fairy tale." The thought of friends and delivery fills us with confidence. Anne Frank even ventured to hope, "I may yet to be able to go back to school in September or October." That was not to be. The Nazis still had about 50 divisions and more than 800,000 soldiers in France alone. D-Day +1 and D-Day +2 and many months of fierce fighting lay ahead. From Arnhem to Hergin Forest to the Bulge.
President Bush also noted the graves of Jewish soldiers.
With us today are Americans who first saw this place at a distance in the half-light of a Tuesday morning long ago. Time and providence have brought them back to see once more the beaches and the cliffs, the crosses and the Stars of David.
And President Bush noted the graves with Stars of David when he spoke in Normandy for Memorial Day in 2002.
All who come to a place like this feel the enormity of the loss. Yet for so many there is a marker that seems to sit alone. They come looking for that one cross, that one Star of David, that one name. Behind every grave of a fallen soldier is a story of the grief that came to a wife, a mother, a child, a family, or a town.
In 2019, President Trump also noted Jewish grave sites.
9,388 young Americans rest beneath the white crosses and Stars of David, arrayed on these beautiful grounds. Each one has been adopted by a French family that thinks of him as their own.
If you want to hear all these presidential D-Day speeches in their entirety, use the C-SPAN video library. Just go to cspan.org. You can even hear President Franklin Roosevelt addressing the nation after Allied forces began Operation Overlord on the early morning of June 6, 1944. Here's part of that radio speech, known as Roosevelt's D-Day prayer.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, last night, when I spoke with you about the fall of Rome, I knew at that moment that troops of the United States and our allies were crossing the Channel in another and greater operation. It has come to pass with success thus far. And so, in this poignant hour, I ask you to join with me in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard. For the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. They will be sore tried by night and by day, without rest, until the victory is won. The darkness will be rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise and tolerance and goodwill among all thy people. They yearn but for the end of battle, for their return to the haven of home. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom.
Oh, and by the way, one more bit of D-Day history. If you're into numbers, consider this on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Paris was liberated nearly 80 days after the Normandy invasion began. Remember to watch on C-SPAN on TV and listen on C-SPAN radio events surrounding the D-Day 80th anniversary. That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly. Thanks for listening, happy searching, and we end this podcast by returning to June 6, 2004, the U.S. military firing a 21-gun salute out to sea from Normandy to honor the D-Day landings 60 years earlier. The salute is followed by the playing of taps. Here's the U.S. Army Europe's Charlie Company, 127th Field Artillery.